Recently, we had the 2022 NFL draft, and it is never too early to start mocking for the 2023 NFL draft. This isn't something I'm normally a fan of doing, but after seeing some mock drafts for the 2023 NFL draft already being made and looking at them, I decided to cave in and do a mock draft myself. Now, this draft order is set based off of the NFL mock draft database website automatically having the draft order as. Now, if there's a way to change the draft order or how to change it, please let me know in the comment section, just in case I happen to do another mock draft before the season begins. That way I can set the draft order based off of how I think the 2022 NFL season will go. Now, in this mock draft, the Falcons have the number one pick in this draft. And despite the Falcons drafting Desmond Ridder in the third round in the draft a couple weeks ago, despite having Marcus Mariota on a 2-year deal, I think that the Falcons had the opportunity to take a quarterback at this point, whether it be C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young. In fact, I think it's going to be a debate between Stroud and Young on who is going to be the best quarterback of the two and which one will go number one overall. I think it's going to be a debate all season long, and it's going to be exciting to see every single Saturday Stroud and Young perform each and every week. Now, both of them have accolades that benefit them as being the number one overall pick. Bryce Young has a Heisman Trophy. He has a national championship game appearance. Bryce Young was very efficient last season. Stroud, he really impressed people at the Ohio State Pro Day by throwing to the Ohio State wide receivers. And he got praise from GMs and scouts. And Stroud got to a slow start this past season, but he got better the further along the season went. So it's up in the air as to who's going to be the top quarterback in this draft class. In fact, we have no idea who it's going to be because the season still needs to be played out. And we could see a quarterback that's completely outside of our radar just go out of nowhere. I mean, this season was Kenny Pickett. I mean, this year we could see Anthony Richardson. We could see Brennan Armstrong come out of nowhere. We can see Grace McCall or Devin Leary or Keaton Slovis or Sam Hartman or even J.T. Daniels. I would not be surprised if we saw any of those quarterbacks just completely fly under the radar all season long and skyrocket to the top quarterback taken in the draft. But I do think it will be C.J. Stroud based off of the praise that he got that at the Ohio State Pro Day by throwing to Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. I think that propels him right now to be the best quarterback in this draft class. But that is for now, because last season it was a debate between Sam Howell and Spencer Rattler for the best quarterback in this draft class. But now Spencer Rattler transferred to South Carolina, and Sam Howell didn't get taken until pretty late in the draft. The Texans are on the clock with the number 2 pick. And this pick for the Texans, I think, is going to depend on how Davis Mills does under center for the Texans. Because Davis Mills, I believe, was the best quarterback among the rookies this past season. And he has earned the starting job of the Texans for this season, which he should be. In fact, I would be upset with the Texans if they didn't make him the starter. Having to take over the starting job after all the turmoil that went down with Deshaun Watson throughout the season, is he going to get traded? Is he not going to? Will Deshaun Watson face the suspension already? I think it's going to be the Texans taking perhaps the best prospect in this draft class in Will Anderson Jr., as he is an absolute monster. In fact, I think Will Anderson should have been a Heisman finalist over Aiden Hutchinson, and it's kind of ridiculous that he wasn't a Heisman finalist considering he was a lot better than Hutchinson. So I'm going with Will Anderson with the number 2 overall pick. Number 3, the Lions on the clock, and I think this will also depend on how the season goes for the Lions. How will Jared Goff do this season? I do feel like no matter how good or bad Jared Goff does, if Jared Goff just completely flies under the radar and has a really fantastic season, I think maybe the Lions would pass on a quarterback here. But if Jared Goff just does average, then I think they're going to go quarterback, and I think they go Bryce Young. So perhaps this is where the draft could arguably really begin with the Seahawks, as they have quite a bit of needs. They've got holes on throughout their defense. DK Metcalf, I believe, is a free agent at the end of next season. So they could go wide receiver. They can go Jackson Smith and Jigba, which I think there's no question that Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to be the first receiver taken off the board in the draft. The question is, where is he going to go? But I think the Seahawks, I think they fill some holes within their defense. I think what Jalen Carter out of Georgia. Number 5, the Jets on the clock. And I think the Jets, they go offensive line here. There was rumors they were going to part ways with Mekhi Becton for the draft. And I know Jets fans may not like this pick, but I think they're going to go with Peter Skoronski out of Northwestern. As I've seen some mock drafts with him going in the top 10, I think he's going to have a case throughout the entire season on why he'd be the first tackle taken off the board. Maybe not the exciting pick, but maybe it's the pick you need to protect your franchise quarterback in Zach Wilson. Number 6, the Jaguars on the clock. And this could be the range where you could see Jackson Smith and Jigba off the board, either 6 through 8, as those are some teams right there that could use a wide receiver. But I think the Jaguars, I think they go with the best corner in this draft, and that is Keely Ringo out of Georgia. Ringo, he brought back the pick 6 to seal Georgia's national championship this past season. 7th pick, the Panthers on the clock, and I think they go edge rusher here. I could see him going in Jigba, but I think they'd pass on him for Miles Murphy, the edge rusher out of Clemson. Clemson has produced some great defensive prospects in recent years. I think Miles Murphy is going to be no different for the Panthers. With the 8th pick, the Bears, this is where Jackson Smith and Jigba comes off the board. As the Bears are desperate for a wide receiver, the Bears have probably the worst receiving core in the NFL at this point. If it's not the worst, it's at least in the bottom 3. They go with Jackson Smith and Jigba of Ohio State, the best receiver in this draft class, who we saw dominate the Rose Bowl against Utah this past New Year's Day. And it was honestly the most dominant performance I've seen, not only in a Rose Bowl, but probably in a college football game, period, at least for a wide receiver. As every single possession, Jackson Smith and Jigba was making plays. The 9th pick, the Giants, they go with Jordan Addison. We don't know where he's going to transfer to. He did enter the transfer portal recently, as it's looking like signs are pointing he's going to be with the Texas Longhorns, as he was meeting up with them earlier in the week. But Jordan Addison off the board at number 9 to the Giants. Number 10, the Washington Commanders. I think they go with a corner. They go with Eli Ricks out of Alabama. The 11th pick, the Steelers on the clock, and I think they addressed one of their biggest needs that maybe they didn't address in the draft, but they go with Brian Breeze out of Clemson. I'm going to say the same thing I said with Miles Murphy, is Clemson, they have produced some great defensive prospects in recent years. Vic Beasley, Grady Jarrett, A.J. Terrell. Number 12, the Vikings are on the clock. And this pick, it could be surprising, but it may not. As I did say that don't be surprised if Vikings took a wide receiver on draft night, but they did not. But they go with a wide receiver here, and they go with Keyshawn Boutte out of LSU, as Adam Thielen's kind of getting up there in age, and I think that Keyshawn Boutte could be a nice comp for Justin Jefferson. I think there would be no doubt in my mind that the Vikings would go wide receiver at some point in this draft, perhaps maybe in the first round. Now, before I move on, I kind of want to point out what's happening in this mock. The first receiver goes off the board in Jackson Smith-Njigba, followed by Jordan Addison. A few picks later, Keyshawn Boutte is off the board. Are we perhaps seeing, once again, like we saw on draft night a couple weeks ago, once one receiver gets taken and once one is off the board, does this start a run of wide receivers come off the board? As we saw on draft night when the Falcons took Drake London. Shortly after, the Jets took Garrett Wilson. Then we saw the Saints trade up for Chris Olave. Then we saw the Lions trade up for Jameson Williams. Are we perhaps seeing another run of wide receivers coming off the board? Pick 13, the Eagles, they address their needs with a corner, as I felt like they didn't really address their needs at all with the cornerback position on draft night or throughout the draft at all. They go with Cam Smith out of South Carolina. And I think Cam Smith is going to be a very underrated prospect throughout the entire mock draft process. In fact, I would not be surprised if Cam Smith ended up finding himself as the top corner in this draft class. I think he's that underrated, and I think a big reason why he does get underrated is because the team he plays for in South Carolina, one of the bottom feeders in the SEC. If he were playing for an Alabama or an LSU or even an Ohio State, I think he'd be the top corner taken no matter what. Number 14, the Raiders on the clock, and the Raiders, I think they follow suit with a corner and they take Joey Porter Jr. out of Penn State. As the Raiders are so desperate for a secondary, their secondary is absolutely atrocious heading into the 2022 season. And I expect receivers to absolutely feast on the Raiders secondary all season long, just in case you need some fantasy advice at some point in this video. Pick 15, the Dolphins are on the clock, and I think they go with edge rusher Nolan Smith out of Georgia. Ideally, you can see maybe a running back taken at this point, as they did make moves to the running back position in the offseason by signing Mostert and Edmonds. But both of them are injury-prone running backs. But the Dolphins, they do have another pick later on in this draft, so perhaps we will see them take a running back. Pick 16, the Patriots on the clock, and you know that they're going to pick somebody random, and the thing is, I don't know who the random person is going to be. I can't really identify who the Cole Strange is going to be in this first round. I mean, it could be a linebacker as far as what their biggest need is. But I think I'll have them taking someone that would be a smart pick for the Patriots in Henry To'oTo'o, the linebacker at Alabama, as that is one of the Patriots' biggest needs. Pick 17, the Titans on the clock, and this is going to be a very controversial pick. But I have him going with Michael Mayer, the tight end out of Notre Dame. The reason why I have him going with Michael Mayer to Notre Dame, the tight end, well, because for one, he's the best tight end in this draft class, at least at this point. But I think it would be safe to say that Michael Mayer is going to be the first tight end taken off the board. And I'd say a tight end is a pretty big need for the Titans at this point. It's arguably one of the bigger needs that they have. I could see him go wide receiver here, as they did draft Treylon Burks in the first round of the NFL draft, but they also did give up A.J. Brown. And Julio Jones is no longer on the Titans. So I could see being a wide receiver. But if the Titans find themselves in a position to take either Smith-Njigba or Addison or Boutte, I would not be surprised if the Titans end up trading up for one of those three. Pick 18, the Texans are on the clock. And I think that, and this could be a surprise with them drafting Dameon Pierce in the draft, but I think they go with Bijan Robinson out of Texas. I know what you're thinking. They just drafted a running back last year. Well, running backs are at a premium these days in the NFL. Because running backs are taking all these hits. And we see a lot of running backs, they start to decline pretty early. So you're better off just getting depth at the running back position. And the Texans, they get their first pick of the running backs. I could see it being Jamar Gibbs out of Alabama, the Georgia Tech transfer. But I think it's a pretty stay-at-home pick here with Bijan Robinson. Because I think Bijan Robinson had a really strong chance of being the first running back taken in this draft class if he did come out. But the injury that forced him to miss the end of the season, it did hold him back a little bit. And I think Bijan Robinson is going to be a Heisman contender, as I do think that with Casey Thompson transferring from Texas to Nebraska, I think the Longhorns are going to be relying heavy on Bijan Robinson this season. Pick 19, the Eagles, they address their needs as far as an edge rush is concerned. They pass on B.J. Ojulari, and they take Derek Hall, the edge rusher out of Auburn. We do kind of see some surprise first-round picks that we don't expect. They happen to go in the first round, and I think Derek Hall, at this point, would be one of them, but we could see Derek Hall transform himself into a first-round pick. Pick 20, the Ravens are on the clock, and they go with their replacement for Marquise Hollywood Brown. And they go with Marvin Mims, wide receiver out of Oklahoma. Because with the Ravens trading away Hollywood Brown, a little bit short staffed on the wide receiver position, believe it or not. Pick 21, the Cardinals. Now, this is the smart pick for the Cardinals, but they have failed to do so in recent years. But they go with Paris Johnson Jr., the offensive tackle out of Ohio State. For some reason, the Cardinals, they refuse to address their needs within the offensive line. And you wonder why Kyler Murray is throwing a tantrum, because he's not being protected. Because the Cardinals, they don't invest in the offensive line. We see a lot of teams, they don't find interest in investing in the offensive line. We saw the Cowboys do it for a couple of years in a row, where they took offensive line in the first round a couple of years in a row. And look what happened. They turned out to be one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, and it was a big reason why Zeke Elliott won Rookie of the Year back in 2016. Pick 22, the Seahawks are back on the clock, and they do go to the quarterback, I believe. But it's not the quarterback you expect. Will Levis is on the board. Tyler Van Dyke is on the board. It's not going to be Spencer Rattler, but it's going to be Anthony Richardson, the quarterback out of Florida here. Because I think Anthony Richardson, as I did mention earlier in the mock draft, that Anthony Richardson could be among one of the quarterbacks that could emerge themselves as the top quarterback taken in this draft class. Or at least towards the top. I think Anthony Richardson is poised to have a big year for Florida. And I would not be surprised if we saw Anthony Richardson as a Heisman finalist this season. Pick 23, the Chargers, they address a need at linebacker, and they go with Noah Sewell, the linebacker out of Oregon, perhaps the best linebacker in this draft class. Pick 24, the Dolphins are on the clock, and they do go running back here. They go with Jamar Gibbs, the running back out of Alabama. We have seen several running backs out of Alabama get drafted in the NFL. Trent Richardson, Eddie Lacy, Derrick Henry, and that's Mark Ingram, just to name a few. And Jamar Gibbs is the next Alabama running back to get drafted in the NFL as he joins a big group of running backs drafted in the NFL. Pick 25, the Colts, I think they go wide receiver, and I think they go with Josh Downs, the wide receiver out of North Carolina. I think a very underrated prospect. He was one of the best receivers statistically in college football this past season. I do believe he was a top 10 receiver in receiving yards this past season. I think he was in the top 8, actually, now that I think of it. Can't remember the top of my head, but Josh Downs had a fantastic season with North Carolina last year. And the Colts get a great addition at wide receiver. Now, the Dallas Cowboys on the clock, and this could get pretty interesting because the Cowboys, they don't always take what is necessarily the biggest need. Sometimes they go with the flashy pick. For example, in 2020, they went with CeeDee Lamb. Although that pick makes sense now considering they traded Amari Cooper away in the offseason. But they do go with flashy picks. And this is more of based off of their need. They go with Brandon Joseph, the safety out of Notre Dame. The Cowboys defense did show improvement in 2021, but showing improvement considering what we saw in the Cowboys defense before that, pretty underwhelming. Pick 27, the Bengals on the clock, and they go corner. They address their big need here as they need help with the secondary. We saw what happened in the Super Bowl. Tony Grimes, the cornerback out of North Carolina, another underrated prospect. As the Bengals, they are desperate to get corners, as that is a weak point with their team, that and offensive line. We saw them address the offensive line in free agency this offseason. Pick 28, the Lions. I think they will go with B.J. Ojulari, the edge rusher out of LSU, as this is going to be a pick that will really excite Dan Campbell, lining up alongside Aiden Hutchinson. Pick 29, the Green Bay Packers, and they will select a wide receiver in this mock draft. They go with Dante Demas Jr. out of Maryland. And the Packers, they, based off their history, they probably won't draft a receiver on draft night, but I think in this mock draft they do, as despite taking 3 wide receivers in the draft, by taking Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs out of Nevada, and Samori Toure out of Nebraska, I still think the Packers, they're going to be desperate for wide receivers moving forward, and they take one right here in the first round. Pick 30, the Kansas City Chiefs, they select the edge rusher out of Pittsburgh, Habakkuk Baldonado, the edge rusher out of Pittsburgh. The Chiefs, this is one of their big needs here, as they do need help with their defense. Pick 31, the Buccaneers on the clock, and they will surprisingly go with a quarterback here out of Kentucky, Will Levis, out of Kentucky. As Kentucky, they had a good start to the year, but once they went up against Georgia, the eventual national champions, it just was a roller coaster throughout the rest of the year. But Kentucky still managed to have a good season in 2021. And I think Will Levis is going to have another solid season for the Wildcats, as they have the potential of doing pretty well again this season. Plus, this is the successor to Tom Brady, and I know they drafted Kyle Trask pretty recently, back in 2021. But is Kyle Trask truly your answer at quarterback after Tom Brady? That's what you got to ask yourselves if you're in the Tampa Bay front office. I'd lean towards no at this point. And rounding out the mock draft, the Bills on the clock at pick 32. And I think they go with Ryan Hayes, the tackle out of Michigan. As what we've seen out of the Bills, they are just a few pieces away from becoming a threat to win the Super Bowl. In fact, they're a threat to win it all this season. They got Von Miller in free agency. They signed him to a 6-year deal. And I can't wait to see the Bills. In fact, I think the Bills right now, I think they are potentially the favorite to hoist the Lombardi Trophy this season. but they draft Ryan Hayes out of Michigan. And that will do it for my first 2023 NFL mock draft. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, have a wonderful day or evening whenever you're watching. And until next time, thank you for tuning in.